Continuing with the reading, Genesis chapter 4. Eve bears Cain and Abel. They offer sacrifices. Cain slays Abel and is cursed by the Lord, who also sets a mark upon him. The children of men multiply. Adam begets Seth, and Seth begets Enoch. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Now, one brief comment here. I just want to point out. Cain is making sacrifices, which means he had the priesthood authority to do so. It doesn't state that directly in the text, no, but we can make the logical conclusion that in order for him to make sacrifices are a priesthood ordinance, therefore he had to hold the priesthood. At this time, he likely held the Melchizedek priesthood. Although at this time it wasn't called the Melchizedek priesthood, because Melchizedek hadn't been born yet. But, so, Cain knew what the proper sacrifice was, and he brought fruits and vegetables instead of a lamb, which has always been the proper sacrifice. So Cain knew what he was doing and purposely brought the wrong sacrifice. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. Now, there's an interesting passage there. It says, Sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. That's talking about Satan, of course. But what does it mean that Cain would rule over him? That's an interesting one. And I will talk about that a little bit more when I read Moses chapter 5, because we read a little bit more detail in Moses chapter 5. Let us continue with this. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. And this is another important thing, which I will go into a little bit more detail when we read in Moses. But we got to understand the mark of Cain is not the curse. The curse of Cain was to be a fugitive and a vagabond, and the earth would no longer render its bounty to him. But the mark was placed on him so that people would not try to kill him. That mark was actually a kind of protection to Cain. But the curse, excuse me, I'm just yawning a lot today. But the curse was to wander as a fugitive and vagabond. That was the curse. at least according to Genesis. But let us continue. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. Okay, one second, just, of course, Cain had a son, Enoch, but there's also the Enoch in the genealogy of Seth later on. Don't confuse the two. We also have to acknowledge that Cain and Abel were not the only children of Adam and Eve, because Cain had a wife, and obviously a number of Adam and Eve's children married married siblings, married brothers and sisters, at least the older members of the family. By the time you get down to something, I mean, as it says later on, Adam was 130 years old when Seth was born, which means he probably had some kids. He probably already had some grandkids, and even some great-grandkids by the time Seth was born. So early on, the first few had to marry siblings. But the next ones could marry nieces, nephews, cousins, whatnot. So the family of Adam grew fairly rapidly, in my opinion. It's just, I mean, given the ages everybody lived back then, they had to have some pretty gigantic families. So, now let's read about Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. I just love those names. I just have to pause. I love his 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal. Great set of brothers there for names, anyways. Generally wicked guys, but great set of names. Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal. Yes. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 times 7. 70 and 7-fold. Not 70 times 7. Truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. So, Lamech is the second murderer. Cain was the first, Lamech is the second. Finally, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also, there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So, the name Seth means appointed. Now, just a final comment on that chapter, which we'll get into, again, more detail in Moses chapter 5. But then began men to call upon the name of the Lord God. Adam and Eve were, of course, righteous people. They talked to God in the garden. Adam was the first prophet. Abel was also a righteous man, but he was murdered by Cain. It wasn't until Seth that Adam and Eve had a son in which faith and authority could be passed down. Before that time, most of Adam and Eve's children seem to have been very wicked. They have embraced the wickedness. Abel was righteous. Once he was killed, there was not another righteous line from Adam until Seth. Now, I don't say that none of Adam's other kids were righteous, but Seth was the first that Adam could ordain, Seth was the first that could inherit the birthright. Seth wasn't the oldest. Abel wasn't the oldest. I think Cain was older, wasn't he? But I don't even think Cain was the oldest. I think they had many children before that. But Adam and Eve had many children, and it would appear that most of them were not righteous.